Welcome back, Sports Office viewers. Julian Martinez here. It is Cotton Bowl week, so we need some Buckeyes insight. We welcome in only the best here. So joining us this week, Dan Hope of 11 Warriors, a site dedicated to all things Ohio State football. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So Texas obviously has been among the top of the rankings all year. I wasn't expecting them to be a 6-point underdog this late in the season. What do you think of Vegas game behind this powerhouse Buckeyes team right now?
Yeah, I think it's a reflection of how well Ohio State has played so far on this CFP. The way that they
Mhm.
not just dominated Tennessee, but then to go to the Rose Bowl and go and take down the number one seed in the CFP by 20 points. I think going into the season, a lot of people thought this Ohio State team was going to be the team to beat, and it didn't always look like that during the regular season. Obviously, had the big letdown at the end of the regular season versus Michigan. But I think the way this Ohio State team is playing right now, it's regained a lot of believers that if Ohio State can play like that for two more games, it can win it all.
What do you think of this momentum swing that they are on? Because, like you said, they've dominated these first two matchups of the CFP, coming off of that loss against Michigan, which, like you said, fans were downtrodden. They were like, how is Ryan Day losing to Michigan again? And now, after a couple blowout wins in the college football playoffs, I don't think anyone cares about that one, or maybe not as much. Maybe not care is not the right word.
Yeah, I can tell you here in Columbus that game just does not get forgotten. When you lose to Michigan, you hear about it for the next 365 days. So I think even if Ohio State wins it all, there's still going to be people who are great over that loss to Michigan. But I think certainly the overall tenor around the Ohio State football program has changed to where, after that Michigan game, there was real talk about if Ohio State goes, they lose in the first round to Tennessee, does Ryan Day get fired? Now you're talking about Ohio State being the front runner to win the national championship. So I think certainly the outlook has become much more positive over the last month, and I think this team has done a great job of really responding to what went wrong against Michigan, realizing that hey, this college football playoff was their last chance to really make good on what was supposed to be a special season for the Buckeyes, and so far they've done what they need to do.
So you mentioned the cold water that got thrown on the hot seat of Ryan Days. How do you think he compares against Sark? Because I think a lot is going to be made about the coaching matchup here. And currently in college football, so there's only a handful of guys that have actually won national titles. Sark got the best of Dabo. Kirby Smart, obviously he's out of the playoffs this one. So now that second tier of guys trying to establish themselves, what do you think is on the line for Ryan Day and Sark respectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some similarities between them. I mean, they're both guys who kind of come from that background of being offensive coaches, quarterback gurus, so to speak. They're both known for being, aggressive offensive play callers, having high flying passing attacks, and that's certainly the case for both of their teams once again this year as well. So I think they're both in, somewhat similar spots there in terms of, they've had success as head coaches, they've won most of their games as head coaches, they've proven themselves to be high level offensive minds. But to your point, neither of them has reached the mountaintop of a sport as a head coach. And so I think certainly, that's something that's on the line for both of those guys that, to establish yourself as, one of the truly elite coaches in college football, you've got to win it all. And we'll see, if one of these two can get it done this year.
Something else that they both have in common, they both recruited Quinn Ewers. Quinn obviously went there right out of high school and then eventually transferred a year later. Only took a couple of handoffs, I believe, while he was at Ohio State. Take me back in a time machine here. What went into initially Quinn going there, and what was the perception after he transferred to Texas?
Yeah, so it was really kind of a whirlwind with him ultimately reclassifying into the 2021 class and then enrolling at Ohio State in August. The original plan was for him to go to Ohio State a year later as he was committed to their class of 2022. And so, when he reclassified into that 2021 class and arrived as a freshman, it was like he never really got settled in at Ohio State because he came in late in the summer, because he has such a big name. He came in with a lot of hype. There was people talking about, oh, is he going to come in and steal the starting quarterback job? But, CJ Stroud realistically was already in position to be the starting quarterback at that point. And I think as well as CJ then played that season, Quinn realized, well, if I stay here, I'm going to have to be a backup for at least one more year because CJ is going to be the starter again in 2022. And so I think that led to his decision to go back to his home state of Texas and, have a chance to play more in 2022. And, I think, frankly, I think when he left Ohio State in 2021, the perception of him in Columbus was pretty negative because, one of the big reasons why he reclassified was so that he could make NIL money. This was early in the process of NIL, and it wasn't as big a thing yet in terms as commonplace a thing, I should say, maybe as it is now. And so a big deal was made of him, getting a $1 million NIL deal and him reclassifying so he could make money because Texas high school players weren't allowed to make money. And so I think a lot of Ohio State fans viewed it as a cash grab that, he came a year early, he got some money, and then he went back to Texas. But, I think, 3 years later, I think, some of those emotions have probably cooled a little bit. I think ultimately it's one of those situations that probably worked out for the best for both sides. Maybe Ohio State fans weren't thinking that a year ago, but
Mhm.
I think right now, I think, Will Howard has been the guy Ohio State has needed at that quarterback position this year. And I think Texas has proved to be the right place for Quinn Ewers.
So you think it was a great decision for Quinn ultimately transfer? You don't think that he could have developed better perhaps under Ryan Day as opposed to Sark?
It's hard to say, because you could always play the what if game, and I think had he stayed at Ohio State, there's probably a good chance he would have become the starting quarterback last year. And you look at Ryan Day's track record with quarterbacks. I mean, he had 3 first-round quarterbacks in a row, and Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, and C.J. Stroud. And so, when you look at the fact that Quinn maybe hasn't quite become that superstar, that future first-round NFL draft pick that people thought he was going to be, is there an argument that maybe he would have been better off staying at Ohio State and developing under Ryan Day? Sure, but I think the reality was that I just don't think that at that time when he made the decision to transfer, that he and his family saw eye to eye with Ryan Day and Ohio State staff necessarily in terms of what that long-term development plan was for him. I don't think Ohio State ever really wanted him to reclassify
Mhm.
in the first place. They allowed him to do it because he was the #1 overall recruit, and it's hard to say no to someone like that. But I think his development process just got so rushed from the beginning that it just never really allowed him to develop the way that he was supposed to be at Ohio State because he was there for such a short time.
Talking about Will Howard too, and he has been electric for Ohio State at times this year, especially I mean, this last game against the Rose Bowl, just lighting up Oregon left and right. Here in Texas too, we know how good he is because him and Kansas State almost walked into DKR last year and beat Texas. Can you describe the type of player he is and what makes him such a threat?
Yeah, I think he's a guy who's really gotten better and better this year at Ohio State. I think going into the year, the feeling was that he might have some limitations as a passer compared to past quarterbacks Ohio State has had. But I think, he's proven over the course of the year that, he can make all the throws. I mean, I think, if you look at the stats from Pro Football Focus, he's been the most accurate deep passer in the country. And that's not something that was expected going into the year because that was viewed as his weakness going into the season. And so I think, he's proven he can be a high level passer in this offense. He's also got, good running ability that's made him a dual threat at quarterback for the Buckeyes. And I think one of his best qualities is his leadership, his intangibles. I think he's a guy who, players really rally around the kind of competitor that he is. Is he quite the pure passer that a CJ Stroud was? I wouldn't say so. Is he going to be the top 5 pick that CJ Stroud was? No, he's not going to be. But I think he's proven that he has the qualities this Ohio State football team is needed, especially when you got a guy like Jeremiah Smith. You got guys like Emeka Buka and Carnell Tate who can often make a quarterback's job easier.
Well, that's a perfect segue because I was going to talk to you about Jeremiah Smith. How crazy is it that you can replace one alpha wide receiver and Marvin Harrison Jr. immediately with Jeremiah Smith, who I talked about dominating in that Rose Bowl? Jeremiah Smith was basically uncoverable. How good can this guy become? Because he has still 2 more years of college in him.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think he's already the best wide receiver in college football, and he's only a freshman. So it's hard to even fathom like how good he could be the next 2 years when you think about the fact he's still just 19 years old. He's only been at Ohio State for a year. He's in a program that's proven it can develop receivers over years and make them better and better. We've seen it with Marvin Harrison Jr., with Jackson Smith and Jigba, with Garrett Wilson, with Chris Olave. So I mean, the sky's the limit for the guy. He's already pretty high up there already, and what he's been able to do this year has been nothing short of remarkable. I mean, like you said, I mean, it's really like there's been no drop off from Marvin Harrison Jr. to Jeremiah Smith. And that's a crazy thing to say because Marvin Harrison Jr. is arguably the best receiver Ohio State's ever had.
Who is wide receiver you, LSU or Ohio State? Because it seems like between the two of those schools, they just keep pumping them out.
I think I'd have to say Ohio State, or I might get in trouble with my readers. But yeah, I think it's a good debate. I mean, obviously LSU is doing great right now. Of some of the guys it has in the NFL, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, of course, leading the way. But you just look at what Ohio State's done ever since Brian Hartline became the coach. I mean, it's been one first round receiver after another, just elite players at that position year after year. And with Jeremiah Smith there, Emeka Buka, Carnell Tate, it's only going to continue.
Jeremiah Smith, like I said, he has blown up, especially these last two games. But there was a little bit of a lull towards the end of November. Michigan actually held him pretty well in check. What does Texas have to do to be able to cover this guy?
Yeah, it's hard. You might have heard the quote from him a week ago where he was asked, when are you not open? He said, if the whole team's covering me. So, you definitely got to put, you got to double them. You got to try different things. If you just go one on one and try to play man against them, even if a corner as good as Jahdae Barron, I think you're going to be in trouble. So I think you certainly have to do creative things defensively to try to take him out of a game, to try to force Ohio State to throw the ball to other people. But he's a special talent, man. I mean, you saw it. One of his big catches in the Rose Bowl. I mean, he's got two guys on him. He leaps up over him and makes a great catch. So he's a special player, and I think the big thing that Michigan did that I think Ohio State allowed Michigan to do is I think Michigan schemed them up in a way where they basically enticed Ohio State not to throw the ball his way. And I think Ohio State took that bait. And I think Ohio State has since then in the CFP realized, no, this guy's too good. Like, we have to find ways to get him the ball, even if the defense focuses its energy on trying to take him out of a game. So I would certainly expect that Texas is going to look to take him out of a game as much as possible. But I think Ohio State has to be willing to say, even if you do that, we're still going to find ways to get the ball in this guy's hands because he's too good.
But even if you shut down Ohio State's passing attack, they have an equally powerful rushing attack. Could you talk about the Chip Kelly impact? Because we know he came in, brought in that inside zone scheme, and they've been able to run the ball really well with Henderson, again, especially this past game. What has Chip Kelly's big contribution been to this Ohio State team?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Chip Kelly's history. He's always been a great coordinator of rushing offenses. His offenses have consistently been among the best in the country. So, no surprise there, but I think he's been able to bring that to Ohio State. I think the interesting thing with Ohio State has been having to navigate multiple injuries along the offensive line, losing Josh Simmons first in its first game against Oregon, and then losing Seth McLaughlin in November. And that second injury in particular, you talk about that loss to Michigan. Probably the biggest reason why they lost to Michigan is because they couldn't run the ball in that game. They were trying to run the ball inside the tackles, and it didn't work. You had a patchwork interior offensive line going against a pair of first-round defensive tackles in Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Since then, in the CFP, I think they've done a much better job of scheming things up in the run game to hide their weaknesses, play toward their strengths. You've seen a lot more counter plays, a lot more running the ball outside the tackles, and I think that's been much more effective for them because of the fact that they are pretty inexperienced on the interior offensive line now, with Seth McLaughlin going down at center and then Donovan Jackson moving out from left guard to left tackle.
The last 2 weeks, obviously, Texas has been the favorite. So I've had asked guests of how the opponent wins gets the best of Texas. Now I want to flip it. I want to ask you, if Texas wins this one, how did they do it against this, again, dominant team over the last stretch of games here, Ohio State?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it does certainly start with slowing down Ohio State's passing game, forcing Ohio State into situations where it has to be able to run the ball to win the game, stopping Ohio State in those short yardage red zone situations. Because you've seen when, against Michigan in particular, when Ohio State has been forced into those kind of games, it has struggled. If this game becomes a passing shootout, which it certainly could be the way these two teams are, I think that probably favors Ohio State, even though Texas also has a dynamic passing attack. But I think if you can force Ohio State's offense into a game where it's not able to hit those big shots through the air and it has to move the ball more methodically, I think you might have a chance.
That's the blueprint. Hopefully Sark follows it. But Dan, Hope, thank you so much. 11 Warriors, appreciate you giving us some Buckeyes insight today, man.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me.
For the day ones, the diehards, the first timers, the old timers, for all the rivalry matches, buzzer beaters, and come from behind miracles. It's not just stats and wins and losses, it's the moments, the shots you can't believe went in, the times you can't do anything but believe. And it's all streaming right here on your connected TV anytime on Fox Local.
The Sports Office, streaming anytime on Fox Local.